just mad because I'm cuter than you.
Knives, guns, sticks, whatever it takes.
Is there anything more exhilarating than watching sweaty, fat, muscular men play fighting each other? I don't think so. It's the most exhilarating thing you could ever experience. This is ECW Hardcore Revolution. It's a PS1 wrestling game from a lesser-known wrestling organization, and you can tell it's lesser known because there's like a ton of playable characters. I don't know, like 30 or something, maybe even more. And yet, as I scroll through them, I only know one. I only know like one character. I know Rob Van Dam as a real wrestler because he was a superstar. And then everyone else just looks at like some guy. Everyone else just looks like your mailman. All the other guys are just like some random guys you would see working in a warehouse. A lot of them don't even dress like wrestlers. They're just wearing like wife beaters and jeans. Like they're not even trying with their character. The graphics in the game are for the most part good, but sometimes they're just ridiculous. Look at this guy. This is not a player-created character or anything. This is like apparently an actual wrestler for ECW. Look at his neck. He looks like some kind of cobra human. He looks like his neck and hair melted into each other. What were they going for here? Mutant from Chernobyl? Buffy the Vampire Slayer demon? I mean, obviously, this is a less organization, because these guys, even in the game, don't look like they're professional wrestlers. Very amateurish. Most of them aren't even in shape. They're just like fat guys that work out. You know that look. It's like a fat guy with big arms. It's like that guy who eats whatever he wants, whenever he wants. He doesn't really live healthy. He just once in a while works out really hard. They could at least have the courtesy to pump themselves full of dangerous steroids to have washboard abs like WWE wrestlers. Sure, you're gonna die when you're 50 of a heart attack, but you're gonna look good doing it. The game has surprisingly good gameplay. The attacks look good, they connect pretty well, you have all sorts of fairly good looking, albeit not very crazy jumpy throws, just like regular wrestling throws you would see really big wrestlers do in like the 80s. The punches and kicks connect, the combat has a good flow most of the time. There's not a lot of problems when it comes to the actual fake fighting. It's like a much slower version of the Smackdown games for the PS1. It's like a lesser Smackdown. It's Smackdown Beta. There's a lot of customization in the different matches. You can have all sorts of different matches. Again, all sorts of different wrestling characters. I'm like looking through the roster and it's like, hey, I think this is a guy that delivered me pizza once. But they look good. Like, the graphics are very good. They're big, thick characters, very realistic looking for a PS1 game, and they move well. They don't move like cartoon characters. They have a good, realistic, real-life flow to the movement. The combat, the running, the walking, everything. Technically speaking, this is a decent game. It's just that I have no idea who all the quote-unquote superstars are. There's like Rob Van Dam, a couple of like hot chicks, and then some guy wearing sweatpants and a black t-shirt. And then some guy in like a Metallica shirt or whatever, wearing like boxing wraps. It's hilarious how cheap the costumes of ECW wrestlers are. A lot of them, they're just like picking out random clothing from the Gap mixed with some fighting gear, like knee pads or whatever. They're wearing like luchador shoes and like $12 XXL jeans from Macy's. But how does this compare to other wrestling and fighting games? Well, let's compare it to a wrestling game, WWF Smackdown 2. This is a wrestling game which I played a lot as a kid. I absolutely loved this game. It was one of the best fighting games ever, and I keep saying this, a lot of you know this, I'm not a huge fan of fake fighting. I like boxing, I like MMA, kickboxing, realistic fighting. The reason I loved the WWF game, SmackDown 2, is because the fighting, while it was fake, it had such a great flow. The combinations were so awesome. The moves were like extravagant and powerful. It wasn't real looking. It was very stylistic, but it was satisfying to complete the moves. And there's so many gameplay options. Like you can throw guys through chairs. Well, not through chairs. That would have to be a pretty small guy to throw him through a chair. You can throw guys through tables. You can throw guys out of the ring. You could do these awesome jumping moves. And the actual fighting controls in Smackdown 2 were so intuitive. Like you can just pick the game up and within 10 minutes you could be doing really awesome high flying powerful moves that just looked fantastic. And all the customization you could do. You can customize your character. You could play as like all the best wrestling superstars from several different generations. It was just pretty much the perfect wrestling game. And that's coming from someone who's not a fan of wrestling. I mean, I could care less about wrestling, but that game kind of made me a fan, at least for a short while. And I mean, it definitely made me a fan of the game. I probably played WWF SmackDown 2 just as much as I played UFC games, like UFC 2, UFC 1. And I played those a lot, mostly online. Like, I love playing UFC games online, testing my battle wit and skill against other people around the world as my favorite real fighters like Conor McGregor and Chris Weidman. So how does ECW Hardcore compare to the fantastic SmackDown 2? Well, it's a much worse version, but it's only worse because SmackDown 2 is so good. Like everything about that game is so good that it just makes ECW Hardcore Revolution look pretty tame and awful in comparison. But that's not to say the combat in Hardcore Revolution is bad. The one thing I think ECW Hardcore Revolution is actually better in, and very slightly better, but just a little bit better, and that's the graphics. Like the characters are slightly better looking in ECW, which is very impressive because ECW, relative to the WWF, WWE, it's like a tiny little organization. It's nothing. So it's pretty impressive how technically advanced the game actually looks. And both games are from around the same time, so it's very impressive that ECW looks slightly better. Now, the next game I want to compare to this one is a wacky wrestling game. It's a very cartoony wrestling game, the Simpsons wrestling game. It was pretty crap, actually. You had pretty lame moves. I mean, you could use objects when you fought, but it was just weird for the most part. The combinations looked bad. The moves didn't connect very well. I mean, the graphics were decent. The actual Simpsons characters looked like the characters from the beloved cartoon, but it just wasn't a good fighting game. It was cool that you could play as all your favorite Simpsons characters, but it wasn't cool the way you played. It was a very lackluster wrestling game, and it didn't even feel like wrestling for the most part. It was like a goofy arcade fighter. There were wrestling moves, but mostly it was just punching guys. Everything else, like the throws, weren't even as good as the punches most of the time, especially with characters that can spam punches like Apu. That was a bad game. Like, not even a bad wrestling game, just a bad game, period. Hardcore Revolution is not a bad game. It has definitely bad and lackluster elements, but the main important thing in Hardcore Revolution, the actual combat and wrestling, that's good. So Hardcore Revolution is much better. The last game I want to compare to Hardcore Revolution is EA Sports UFC 2. I put a lot of time in UFC 1, and UFC 2 I put in just as much time, mostly online. I love fighting, like I said, online. It's probably the best looking fighting game ever made so far. It had great moves, like all the great MMA moves, Muay Thai, kickboxing, boxing, karate, wrestling, like real wrestling, real throws, submissions. It was just a mixture of the best, and the combat flows well. It's just an overall fantastic fighting simulation, and it's much better than ECW Hardcore Revolution. Graphically speaking, obviously it's better. Everything's better mostly because it's, 15, 16 years younger than Hardcore Revolution, but it's just more fun to play as well, just because of how technical the game is. All the moves look good, and all the moves are so satisfying when you knock someone out. And there's actual blood in this game. In EA Sports UFC 2. The thing is, there's also blood in ECW Hardcore Revolution, and it's a lot more impressive that Hardcore Revolution has blood once you damage someone, because it's an older game. You kind of expect there to be blood and gore when you're thinking about a fighting game from 2016. Overall, though, I mean, EA Sports UFC 2 is probably the best looking fighting simulation, and it's probably the best fighting simulation period, just because it's such a quality title and so realistic. So it is better than Hardcore Revolution in almost every way. So that's ECW Hardcore Revolution. Not the best wrestling game ever, not even one of the best ever, but it's definitely okay to kind of decent, and it's a lot better than some fighting and wrestling games. I think this is a wrestling game that's worth it. The combat is good, and really that's all that matters. I don't care that I don't know who all these wrestlers are, as long as the fights look good. Who cares who they are? It would be nice, obviously it would be nice if you had more like Rob Van Dam caliber superstars, but you know, what are you going to do? It's a small organization. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more classic game reviews. Goodbye, my friends.